Hello, everybody. This is your host, Aram Melkoumov, and you're listening to another Product Innovation Show episode. Every week, the guests that we have on our show share their stories and wisdom on how to ship a great product. On the show today, I have Ale Pintaudi, who's the Global Director of Product Management at Payfit. He leads a cross-functional team of product managers, designers, and engineers. He is responsible for the strategy of a multiple portfolio on the HR and payments product side, serving 150 employees across Europe. He's focused on enabling cross-functional teams to deliver user-centric experiences on e-commerce and SaaS products. Ale, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Same here, and hi everyone. Happy to be here with you.
Awesome, cool. Well, let's jump in with the first question.
Sure.
I always like asking this. It's, the key kind of responsibility of a product manager is knowing how to build the right product. So when a product manager is joining a company or is focusing on a new product initiative within their organization, what should the focus points be initially for the product manager to consider when trying to determine whether or not it's the right product to build?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I believe that different organizations have different ways of dealing with that. I kind of like to think that as a product manager, our duties is to be responsible for both strategy, discovery, and delivery. And so I like to slice that down into, let's say, the 6 hills of product development, where you start with defining a vision for your product. It needs to be inspiring, but also realistic, and needs to reflect what the market is, your competitors, and the value proposition you're planning to deliver. It goes through defining the objective, and I'm not talking about OKRs, but it's more about the business objective. So the jobs to be done you're trying to fulfill for your users, the impact that you're trying to reach, and that's it's very key in the strategic part, because this defines what you're trying to accomplish as a business. It then goes through a proper discovery session. So you need to identify all the problems that is preventing you to achieve that objective. And you need to empathize with your users. You need to better understand how they work, what are the pain points on their daily basis. And after that, try to brainstorm within a limited time box activity, because we don't have endless time when we build product. On what is the best problem solution fit for those problems you found. And once you got that, then you can enter into the delivery. And so you can enter into the solution deliveries, scoping out your solution, running spikes, MVPs, launching a beta in order to start testing your product. And eventually, once you launched it, you need to go through optimization, which doesn't mean starting the whole process from scratch, but it's more about, based on the objective you defined at the beginning, you try to run very short bets in order to run rapid experimentations, A/B testing, until you get to the point where you want it to be when you started, which was your objective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And just to go a bit deeper into one of those steps in that process, previously, me and you kind of discussed the importance of being able to slice out certain parts of a product funnel in order to determine conversion rates through that kind of journey. What does that process? What does that process look like, or what do you do around this at your current company?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most important steps in this product development process is actually the objective definition. And part of the work that we're carrying out through this phase is to analyze and understand the jobs that our customers are trying to achieve with or without our product. So they're probably hiring another product, most likely Excel if you're a productivity tool, to run their job on a daily basis, or they're doing it with multiple tools. And so defining what they're trying to accomplish before actually trying to digitalize that into a product helps you to understand which are the steps that the user is trying to take in order to accomplish that job. And eventually, once you digitalize that, it takes the form of multiple steps. So in B2C, for example, you go from a web page to a search, you identify the product, you browse through the details of your product, and eventually end up with a conversion, purchasing a product or any service or material you wanted to perform in that search. For a B2B, it might look like more like a request or like uploading some documents. So it concerns a list of steps that leads to a conversion. So it has a start and it has an end, and it has a series of steps in between. And so your job can be sliced down in a list of steps, and you could potentially measure at every single step the conversion and the combination of the conversion of the multiple steps to get to the end of that and measure the number of successful job funnel that you had within your product. Which means that if on step 2 you see that you have a drop of conversion of 80%, you know that there you might have a problem, and you want to slice down and investigate more qualitatively what's the problem of the user. Why did the users drop at step 2? Was it not understood or was meant to be done, that step, or simply it was not fulfilling their job because they needed to do something else before that? And so what we're trying to do is to measure the number of active users per job funnel. We're trying to measure the average time spent on the job funnel, and also to measure the number of job funnel that started and finished per user, to eventually measure the successfulness of the whole job funnel.
Perfect. No, that's a great process. So thank you for sharing that. I think if product managers aren't currently trying to think the way you are, they really should. So thank you for sharing. In your experience as a leader in product, what has been that you've seen your own product managers or even yourself struggle when it comes to determining what new feature or product to build for the market? You know, if it's B2B or B2C, is it like the early stages of trying to like create your hypothesis? Is it like validating it? Like, can you share some experience on that? Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest challenge overall is to try to deliver significant value to your customer, which is in the end result. You're trying to optimize something that they're already doing somehow with another product, with something else. And so how do you deliver value to your customers? I think one of the things that we don't spend enough time is really trying to empathize with our user and try to understand what they're really trying to accomplish beyond our product. Very often we deal with customers that are already using the product, and therefore we're trying to optimize what exists today without thinking why they hired the product in the first place. And therefore we are maybe solving problems that concern the existing user journey that was developed without thinking really behind the user deep motivation and needs. And potentially we're over optimizing a solution that is not what ultimately our customer want. And therefore one of the proxy that we can use in order to measure that, which is adoption, like how many customers are using our solution, could help us as well to measure how well we're doing, how well we are delivering value to the customer. Another framework I like to use as well is the Pro Market Fit survey. It's a very popular framework invented by Sean Ellis, and it measures basically the likelihood of a customer to find value into your product by measuring basically the market fit.
of your product. It's around one key question, which is basically, how would you feel if you could no longer use your product? And if you get at least 40% of customers that are answering as very disappointed, it means that they didn't have an alternative to run that job, and therefore the value you're providing to them, it's enough to say that they'd rather not stop using your product and hire something else, because you're doing something that it brings value to them.
And how important do you think? Well, let me rephrase my question. This is a very important responsibility. In your experience, is this something that a product manager should be accountable for in terms of its success or failure?
I believe it depends on the organizations, right? You have some organization where product managers are only responsible for delivery, and then you have the senior product managers in the team that are carrying out the discovery work and then delivering pieces of information to other teams. And then the more you go up into the career, you get into the strategy. I tend to think that if we hire people in the end is because we want to empower them and we want them to grow as well. And therefore, depending on the complexity, obviously, we're not giving too many responsibility for what they can actually take on, but being responsible for a specific scope from strategy to discovery and delivery, and ultimately responsible of the results of the work you're doing, is on one side empowering, and I believe also motivating people, and especially product manager, whose main motivation most of the time is to deliver impact. And so if ultimately you're not responsible for the impact you're delivering, therefore the value to your customer, it would be very difficult to seek motivation through just delivering a bunch of features or through optimizing a metric that you don't know deeply in your heart if it's the right one or not.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Regarding product development steps that product managers typically go through in an organization, whether that's from discovery to delivery, what are some things that you've seen frequently get missed? So I know we talked about discovery and like the importance of product market fit and determining and validating, the need in the market and things like that. So that's obviously one really important one. But aside from that, what are some other things that you've seen or your team has in the past or currently skipped that you've seen as something that was like a shortfall?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question because, again, depending on the process you're using, you might skip one step or another, but following the guiding principle of our product development process, an important step that we have at the objective definition phase, which I consider one of the most important phase because it determines what you're going to do afterwards, is the analysis of all the risks and the identification of all the risks that you might incur when you start identifying the problems and eventually defining your solutions. And it can go from a legal risk to a technical one, or to the value you think you will deliver to the customer. And so spending time identifying the risks and then finding ways to test those riskiest assumptions first by launching, for example, a fake door test, or by creating a proof of concept if you need to test the feasibility of that, or by running a legal assessment before actually you start working on that, and not waiting for the end of the cycle and the go-to-market to ask your legal team whether something is possible or not. I feel it's something that very often, even in my career, I felt we missed, and therefore I consider as quite important step not to that lead potentially to miss your ultimate objective.
Yeah, no, it's very true. In that kind of like thought process, what have you done in the past in order to remove decision-making bias? So, for example, you have access to the users, you have access to the data, so you have the quantitative data. How do you, when you analyze it, how do you remove, or does your team remove bias in kind of their decision-making process?
Yeah. Well, to some extent, I guess removing it entirely, it's very hard, and I'm not entirely sure if it's possible. But reducing that, definitely, it's something that we should all aim at. And so, being like going through steps like making sure that we empathize and we understand deeply what the user are doing, and therefore not only receiving briefing but actually taking part of the interviews, making sure that not only the product manager and the user researcher are taking part of the interviews, but also the engineers, rotating perhaps, are taking part of interviews and taking part of the work that is not only the delivery part but also the discovery part. So having multiple point of views and having a diverse team with different skills, different knowledge, that it's one way of reducing the bias, because then you don't have only one person taking the decision, but you have multiple point of views from different expertise to different people that have been exposed to partially the same information, but they understood that from different angles and with their background and expertise. And so there is where you try to reduce that.
Yeah, and just on that point, I think a lot of companies don't bring in their engineers early enough in the discovery process in order to provide that kind of like sanity check or that technical kind of like thought process in that decision making. So that's very true.
Yeah.
Tell me about Payfit. How do you manage your own product team as a leader in the company?
Yeah. Well, we'd like teams to be quite autonomous and empowered. So since the very beginning, we create quite autonomous squads, meaning that they have all the right set of skills and tools in order to run their job as efficient as possible, with some limitation, obviously. Like, you never have the perfect organization, so you always have some flaws here and there, but that's at least what we're trying to achieve by creating teams with a dedicated mission, with objectives that are set and decide together with the team on a annual cadence, and then key results refined on a quarterly basis. And teams are ultimately responsible for defining the strategy, defining and running the discoveries, and eventually also accountable for the results. That doesn't mean that they're thrown into the field and they're not being follow up. What we're trying to do is to set a system with some guiding principles, and we are trying to give the tools and the techniques, what works, the best practices that have been used and reused by the different teams, in order for them to choose and pick the best ones for that moment. So we try not to have like strict processes that everyone needs to follow through as if we were in a supply chain. But it's more about giving the framework in which they can operate. For example, like a playbook can help into taking a decision based on the situation which you're in. You're choosing the tactic that you want to implement in order to understand more about your customer or better deep dive into the solution. and at the same time implement a system that enable us to have a conversation which is bi-directional. So decision needs to be taken either at the leadership level or at the team level in a quite autonomous way, because the context is shared and is flowing in a very nice way in both directions. Decisions are shared, discussed, and challenged as well in both directions. So you cannot delegate without follow through, otherwise you abdicate from your responsibilities. So obviously a discussion needs to happen, but at the same time you want to make sure that anyone at any point of time can take the best decision based on the context that they've been exposed to.
Awesome. And you mentioned that, through time in your different teams, you've created or developed your own kind of processes for certain things, from how to do discovery and, user interviews and things like that. Are there any frameworks that have proven to you as like your golden kind of standards, either in discovery or in delivery, that you'd want to recommend to others?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of frameworks out there, probably too many, and so it's very difficult to pick. But the ones we are using quite often, for example, at the stage of creating and shaping the vision, is the value proposition canvas. This is something that helps us as well to better understand how we can map and understand the value we can bring to our users based on what they're trying to achieve. Lean canvas also, which is then like a consequence of that, put that into perspective from a business standpoint, helps us to frame the opportunity that we are going after as well. Different phases, the customer journey map, it's another great framework that helps us to understand how the user is trying to fulfill their job. We use a lot storyboarding or story mapping at the problem solution fit or a solution delivery stage. Mostly that. We also develop from time to time some internal framework, which is a mix of multiple ones if we see that it's not really fulfilling what we're trying to accomplish. Because in the end, when you have a framework, it's not about following the framework by the book, exactly. It needs to help you achieve something you're trying to achieve, and therefore, if it doesn't help, then you should be free to adapt it.
Yeah. And on the value, I'm just curious, on the value proposition and the lean canvas, I mean, the lean canvas is a tried, tested, true framework that tries to keep things objective. But on the value proposition one, how do you write it out, or how does your team write it out so that it's clear, it's objective, it's to the point, without it trying to be like some sort of super ambitious type of unachievable sort of like plan?
Yeah. Well, we first try to dig into qualitative and quality information before running the workshops, which means running a couple of user interviews, going into the data, and then we sit down together and we try to brainstorm. So we spend 15 minutes individually to generate post-its on the different jobs that, based on the evidence we accumulated in the past 2 weeks of discovery, we know the user is trying to achieve, and we try to list them out. Then we spend time discussing it, we group it, and then we kind of filter out the ones we agree most on. And then we try to do the same with the pains and the gains. So we combine like individual work with group work, so that at the end we get to discuss about the evidence behind a specific job that someone listed. And so depending on the maturity of the team and the level of exposure that I had to the customer, your assumptions on the job that the user is trying to accomplish is more true or less, is more or less biased, let's say. But again, like the group work is the part that needs to remove as much as possible this bias. And then of course we are at the phase in which we're defining the assumptions. And so at some point we need to test them. So even if we created a value proposition, it's something that we need to test out with the customer to see actually if those are the jobs they're trying to achieve.
Right. Okay, excellent. Couple more questions and then we'll jump into this Fireside question set I have. So my next question is, in your experience building product, and you have, I think, tried and true experience, being a product manager all the way to now leader in an organization. Can you share some worst kind of product or features that you worked on that you had to deal with in your career, and how soon did you realize that this is not working? Was it in the early stages in the value proposition? Was it already in delivery, or it's too late maybe? Can you maybe give an example and tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot lie, there's a bunch of examples out there, because when you do product, hopefully most of the time you succeed, but you also have lots of examples in which you fail. And the most important thing for me is to fail fast and try to reduce that time when you realize that things are not going in the right direction and you want to change that. I think one interesting example was a few years ago when I was working in a B2C company. So it was e-commerce website, and one of the team I was responsible for search. And so search is a quite complex topic. You got so you're mostly driven by the conversion that your website has when the user is running a search, and the likelihood of finding what they were looking for, and therefore moving to the next step of the website. And involves a mix of user experience, because it's ultimately where the user is looking for the product is searching. But it's quite complex as well, because behind the technical component might go from complex to very complex, depending on the product you're handling, and depending on the complexity of the algorithms that you are dealing with. And so there, because of the complexity, we were basically like a travel agency, and therefore we were combining a mix of products within the same package, activities and hotels. Therefore, it was like a multi-product search run almost instantaneously, because you had to provide almost real-time availability at the time of the search. And so at that moment, the team was trying to figure out what was the best technology. We were migrating to Elasticsearch, which at that point in time was quite trendy, because they started with an in-house technology. And so they were moving to Elasticsearch. And I felt that the team was spending lots of time into trying to nail the technical part of that, forgetting ultimately what the user was trying to achieve. And so we were building like a monster that probably would have given us the best search ever, but eventually was not necessarily what the user wanted, because the user simply want to find the right package at the right time in few clicks. And maybe at that stage in the process, they didn't need the perfect availability or the perfect prices. And I realized that probably what was missing in that step was defining a clear vision of the product and define in details the objective we're trying to accomplish as a business for the search. And because that context was not properly defined and it was not properly conveyed and explained to the whole team, some decisions were taken they probably were not going in the direction we were seeking for our customers.
Interesting. So if you were to do it differently, you would have planned out the user objectives a lot clearer at the beginning.
Yeah, I would have probably taken a step back and spent time with the whole team trying to re-understand what the user was trying to accomplish and what, as a business, we were trying to accomplish as well for our users. And reassess eventually if the direction we're taking, the technology we chose, and the way we're going towards was actually the right one to deliver the right value for the customer, and eventually to capture that as revenue for the business.
Oh, thank you for sharing this story. All right, cool. I got some Fireside questions for you.
All right.
So the way it works are 4 questions. Try to answer them in a minute and a half. Do your best.
All right. Quite challenging. Let's try.
On the hot seat. Yeah. So the first question I have is, we've come across lots of companies that don't have very transparent product processes. So my question to you is, why do you think this happens, and who needs to fix it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Overall, I personally don't believe much in the perfect process. Like, processes should help you to structure the organization and be more efficient, but sometimes have the opposite effect. And in product especially, the organization is changing. More functions are being added into the cross-functional teams in order to create product. And therefore, the processes are changing as well and evolving. And in different organizations, based on the context, maybe different processes are required. Therefore, I will more focus on having or setting the right guiding principles and define a system in which the company works because of the context in which they are in. This needs to be accessible from everyone in the organization. Therefore, since the moment you get onboarded, and therefore you're getting trained and explain how the company works, you should be exposed to this guiding principle and system so that once you start working, you actually take the right decisions.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Second question. There's typically a lot of pressure, especially in B2B or even sometimes in B2C organizations, but predominantly B2B, where you have a big customer that comes in and wants you to do some feature, right? How do you dig yourself out of that situation as a product leader?
Yeah, that's a very tricky one. First, I was quite lucky not to be in that position very often because I was dealing mostly with small a customer and small companies. But if you get into that position, and it happened a couple of times, I would suggest to try to get into a business model where you don't rely too much on 1 or 2 customers. Try to change that and to adapt that. And eventually, if you cannot, because that's at the heart of your business model and you can only rely on big corporation, try to build a product that at least ease the customization and makes that product scalable. Because you don't want to invest 100% or 90% of your time into one customer. You want to diversify the risk. And so if you cannot do it through your business model, try to do it with your product and try to make sure that at the end of that, you're not going to rely into your customer. That should into only one customer. That should be the objective.
Yeah, very true. Okay, next question. This happens all the time. It's very common where a lot of product managers or product teams sometimes copy or reference very closely the features from other competitors in the market. So my question is, why do you think they do it instead of not just focusing on their customers?
I think the simple answer is that because it's easier. You have less work to do. You use the solution of someone else's assumption and you just test it out. But very often does not turn out well because the customer jobs of your competitors might not be the jobs that your customer are trying to accomplish. Therefore, trying to really deep dive into what they're ultimately trying to accomplish with or without your product and try to find out the pain points in doing that can actually help you to create an innovative product and eventually boost adoption for your product as well.
Bang on. Great. You're doing awesome. All right. Last question. Some organizations ask their users what to build next, in their roadmap, or even like early on. There's always a time and a place for it, I think. What do you do as a product person in order to make sure that that is what should be really built, instead of relying solely on those users' ideas and suggestions?
Yeah, like you said, like if customer knew what they wanted, probably first we won't be here, but most likely we won't build the right product. Probably if Ford asked their customer what they wanted back in the beginning of the century, they would have said a faster horse. And actually what they wanted was going from A to B faster. And that's why you end up building an innovative solution like a car. And so understanding in the end, which is the deep motivation, what you're trying to accomplish overall is what leads you to innovation and what leads you to creating a product that you didn't think it was possible, that your customer did not think it was possible because they didn't have that in mind. And because of the technology that is available, because of the knowledge you have in your business, and because of what you know about your customer, together with your team and with smart group of engineers, designers, and product managers, you can find out the most innovative solution to that problem.
Awesome. Great job, Ali. Thank you so much. We'll wrap it up here. So huge applause I want to give to you for the episode today. I think you did a fantastic job. Thank you for coming on our show and sharing your wealth of experience with us. And lastly, of course, thank you to all of our listeners who are constantly tuning in and supporting the show and following us. Ali, it was great having you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanking you for having me here as well. And wish you good luck for your next episode as well.